Hello everyone, I'm Zach with World of Game Design, and today I'm going to teach you how to play Achtung, Cthulhu 2d20 by Modiphius Entertainment. Before slamming home into 2d20, Achtung took a lap through the Fate system, Call of Cthulhu, and even Savage Worlds. Moving forward, Modiphius has let all that go in favor of their own 2d20 system. There's also a tactical miniatures game called Achtung Cthulhu Tactics that uses the exact same setting. The 2d20 version of this system is excellent, and is supported by what is, in my opinion, an incredibly solid player's guide, game master's guide, and series of adventures and campaigns. Each 2d20 game has its own intricacies, so just because you may have watched the Dune 2d20 video that we did a while back, doesn't mean that you won't want a refresher on this one. Oh, there's also a forthcoming Cohors Cthulhu, which welds elder gods to the Roman Empire, and that's coming before too long, it seems like, for Modiphius. Alright, now that we've laid the foundation, let's dive into our guide. You can distill Achtung down to two core elements, World War II pulp and the Cthulhu mythos. It's not really a horror game, nor is it overly suspenseful. You can do that sort of thing in it, I suppose, but where it really wants to sit is in the high-action pulp atmosphere. It's a slightly more vibrant take on the Elder Gods than what you might find in the Call of Cthulhu RPG, but not so light as to be seen as watered down or playing it safe. Here, you're part of the secret war that roils underneath the surface of World War II. Where your brothers in arms may be tossing grenades and letting loose howls of automatic gunfire, you might be doing the same thing, but you may also be wielding ancient power, wrangling artifacts, and using the latest in top-secret science to rain hellfire on Nazi sorcerers and their eldritch allies. You'll be playing as an allied agent tied to a secret branch of either the British Commonwealth or the United States military. By and large, you'll be carrying out high-priority missions all over the world as you keep the secret war from spilling over into the larger one. As mentioned at the start, you'll be using a version of the 2d20 system. The system gets its name from the fact that your base die roll is going to be a pair of d20s. You may only be rolling 2, but you can also, by way of abilities and roleplay, add up to another 3 of those dice to your roll. Each time you toss the d20s, you're going to be trying to hit or stay under a target number. You don't add dice in this game, typically. Each d20 will stand on its own. So if you're rolling 4 d20, you'll have 4 chances of success. Some rolls will have a higher difficulty, which may require more than 1 success, but any successes you get over what is required can be converted into bonuses. More on that later. Players can also modify their chances for success by increasing the number of d20s they roll, their critical hit range, or with their game master's permission, bringing something to bear in the situation that will reduce the number of successes that you need to achieve. Other than that, you'll also be rolling d6s when you deal damage. You'll want to have several of these, and the game uses dice with special icons, though you can use standard d6s at your leisure. We'll dive more into how damage works in the combat section of the video. That's basically it, though, for dice rolling. Grab a handful of d20s and another handful of d6s, and you're good to go. Moving into the character sheet, it starts out with things like name, nationality, and rank, which are largely flavor and not necessarily mechanical. Then it goes to archetype, background, and characteristic, which are the building blocks of character creation, and we'll cover those in just a minute. And then personal truths and scars. Personal truths and scars are basically the same thing mechanically. They are keyword descriptors that are brought to bear in a situation to reduce or, in some cases, increase the difficulty of a roll by adjusting the number of needed successes. Let's say Andrew's trying to evade a squad of Nazis in his Jeep, and the game master has told him the difficulty will require 3 successes. Andrew can point out that his character has a truth of speed freak, which he's interpreting to mean he's very comfortable with high-speed maneuvers. If the game master agrees, Andrew's difficulty will be reduced by 1. Scars function exactly the same, but will more often be to the character's detriment when they're put to use and will increase the difficulty level. Skipping stress and injuries for now, we'll find that each character is composed of 6 basic attributes and a collection of skills. Each attribute will have a score from 6 to 11 at the start, and each skill will have a score from 0 to 5. Agility is speed and balance, as well as your 2-hit with melee weapons. Unlike D&D, it has nothing to do with ranged weapons. Brawn pulls triple duty and thus is incredibly useful. It's the baseline for your armor stat. It helps determine your ability to take on stress, and characters with high brawn will get bonus dice for melee weapon damage, starting at a score of 9. Insight is how you get bonus damage for your ranged attacks, again starting at a score of 9, and some magic users use the Insight attribute to cast their spells. Reason is how other casters cast their spells. And Will is yet another attribute that casters may use to cast spells, along with being the way of calculating your courage stat and assisting in your ability to take on stress. As I mentioned, with these skills, you now have a score from 0 to 5, and I'll point toward one in particular as being important. Oddly enough, the resilience skill is also used in calculating your maximum stress. Actually, let's just go over that now. Stress is your character's ability to shrug off damage before it becomes an injury. We'll cover injuries more in the combat section, but when you build your character, you'll calculate how many stress points you have by adding your resilience skill to either your brawn or your will attribute, whichever's higher. The total will be your number of stress points. Tough brutes will have a lot of stress points because they're built like a brick wall, while other characters may have a high stress score because their high will score gives them a mind built like a fortress. Okay, where were we? Skills. Whenever you're called upon to make a test, your game master will say something like, okay, Andrew, make an insight persuasion test at a difficulty of 1. You'll need to get at least 1 success on your d20s in order to succeed. From there, you'll take the attribute and the skill and add those 2 numbers together. The result is your target number. Roll your d20s, and if either one hits or falls below your target number, you have a success. Here, you'll need a 14 or lower to succeed. A roll of 1 would count as a crit and result in 2 successes. But wait, what are these things called focuses here on the side? These are keywords that act something like specialties for each skill. Your character will start with a few of them and can get more as they gain experience. Andrew here has a focus, charm, in his persuasion skill. If he can find a way to use charm during the scenario, he'll get a sweet, sweet bonus. Having an applicable bonus in a skill expands your crit range for that roll. Now, instead of critting on a 1, Andrew will crit on a 1, 2, or 3 anytime he uses his charm focus. The focus changes the crit range from 1 to the number associated with that skill. That's huge. Every d20 now for this skill has a 15% chance of scoring a critical instead of a 5% chance. Finding ways of playing to your character by bringing your focuses to bear in a situation is a huge part of the game, and your best bet at scoring several successes on a single roll. Let's use a short example. Andrew doesn't get any bonus d20s on his roll, but he's going to use charm. He rolls 2 d20s, and he gets a 2 and an 11. The 2 is a critical, because it's 3 or below, which is his critical threat range. So it counts as 2 successes. And the 11 also counts as a single success because it's lower than the target number of 14. That means Andrew has 3 successes on this check, and he only needed 1. So what happens with all those extra successes? This is the next piece of the 2d20 kit. Momentum, threat. Momentum is saved success. When you only need 1 success, but you manage to score 3, those 2 extra successes are momentum. Your party can have a grand total of 6 save momentum squirreled away for a rainy day, and it's a shared pool. So it's 6 total saved that the whole party can make use of. These momentum points can be cashed in by anyone at the party, with or without party approval, and can be used in any of the following ways. 1. by buying extra d20s for your roll. You can add a single d20 to your roll by spending a point of momentum. You can add 2 dice by spending 3, and you can have all 3 points of, you can add 3 dice to the pool, making it a total of 5 by spending all 6 points of momentum. You can also use momentum to create new truths for yourself. This is tied to something typically that you just did by spending 2 points of momentum. Usually, but not always, this type of truth will be temporary and may last for only a scene. Another way you can use momentum is you can spend a point of it to reduce the time it would usually take to do something. And then finally, you can spend momentum to obtain information about the current scene from the GM by spending 1 point. This information must be truthful, but doesn't need to be exhaustive. Momentum only recharges by those extra points of success. But those should come steadily, so don't be afraid to use some momentum to frequently juice a roll. After all, if you juice a roll, and you're more likely to succeed at that point, and thus you're more likely to have a few successes left over. And after every scene, you'll lose one of your momentum points. So it's definitely a use them or lose them situation. To balance momentum, the GM has threat. It works exactly like momentum, except the GM can gain threat in a lot of different ways, and they can spend it on a variety of nasty options. You can read more about threat on page 24 of the Player's Guide, but I'll say quickly that a GM using threat to harrow a party may feel in the moment like the Game Master is putting up roadblocks to your successes intentionally. That's because they are. The GM uses threat to gain extra d20s, just like the players, or to add complications to a scene. Threat is an objective tool within the GM's tool belt that they can use to make the scenes and NPCs more epic and nefarious. It's their way of nudging the story ever so slightly in the direction it should go. Players can buy additional momentum with the GM's permission by giving them equal amounts of threat. They can also give the GM threat to avoid a complication that arose, again, if the GM allows it. Speaking of complications, there is a opposite side to critical hits and successes, and that's what a complication is. Complications arise when you roll a natural 20 on one or more dice. Natural 20s are bad in this game. Depending on the test difficulty level, you might also get a complication on a 19, or an 18, or a 17, or even a 16. That table is found on page 22, but basically the complication threshold raises in parallel with the difficulty of the test. A difficulty level 1 has a complication level of 20. Difficulty level 2 will have a complication level of 20 or 19. Difficulty 3, 18, 19, 20, so on and so forth. Complications are when you not only fail, but failed miserably on one or more of your dice. It doesn't mean necessarily that you failed the full test, just that your test success or failure is accompanied by a complication. Something went wrong during the scene. You could roll a 1, a crit, and have a crit, and also roll a 20 on the second die, and need to mix in a complication alongside your success. The Game Master can use a rolled complication to impose a new temporary or permanent truth on your character, or to influence the scene against you. The severity of the complication should be determined by a mixture of stakes of the roll and what the story calls for in the moment. Play it by feel here. Complications always raise the stakes, always add tension. Don't shy away from them, though. Part of being the pulp hero is having problems being thrown at you, and you finding ways of overcoming all odds against all reason. Without the complications, you're really not much of a hero. What's left on the character sheet that doesn't get into combat? Fortune. Fortune points can be spent to automatically do awesome stuff like critically hit, reroll a check, get a free action in combat, and other rad things. Think of them as a combo of get out of jail free plus inspiration. You get 3 fortune points at the start of each new adventure. The only way you can get more is if you're playing well and your GM is feeling generous. And when has your GM ever felt generous? Equipment of note is a list of all your most important gear. Finding a way of using a piece of gear is another way that you can reduce the difficulty of a test. Digging a foxhole by hand in an evening might have a difficulty of 5. Basically impossible. But holy smokes, it's a lot easier when you have a shovel. Talents are the last thing we'll cover in this section. Talents are basically feats from D&D. They are special abilities that your character has that makes them unique and allows them to bend particular rules when applicable. As an example, maybe a talent will let you re-roll one of your d20s for a specific skill. You'll start out with 3 talents and gain more as time goes on. Okay, before we get into the bits on combat and magic and close this thing out, let's run through archetypes, backgrounds, and characteristics. As I mentioned earlier, these are the core building blocks of every character. Your characteristic is a core component of your character that has little to do with your contributions to the World War or to the Secret War. There's a whole list of these, and they range from things that deal with your physique, to your hobbies, and even a few options for how you were raised. You'll pick one of these as your characteristic. Your background is what you were doing before you were drafted into the Secret War. For a lot of characters, your background will detail what organization you were with during World War II, like the Army or the Navy, but others might be something like being a spiritual leader, a pastor, or a journalist. Finally, your archetype is what role you were drafted into within the Secret War. There's a smaller list here than there is with the other 2 pillars. You can be a boffin, a commander, a con artist, a grease monkey, an infiltrator, an investigator, an occultist, or a soldier. All are important positions in halting the advance of the Nazis and other agents of the Elder Gods. What I should note here is that all 3 of these blocks are almost equally important. Each of them gives you extra points for your attributes and skills. Each of them gives you a talent and a set of gear, and all 3 of them also give you little extras like truths and focuses. This is really, really cool, as it means that unlike something like D&D, where really your class is 90% of your character's mechanics, here all 3 facets play equally important. Mixing and matching these 3 across all the options effectively gives you a vast array of characters you can put together. This is easily one of the best parts of the system, and is definitely the reason that I fell in love with it right away. Let me give you an example of what I mean here. Let's say that you want to use magic, or you want to, have some magical power in some way, shape, or form. You can be the occultist, and that lets you do spell casting. And if you want to lean in and do heavy into magic, you could be an occultist with a spiritual leader background, and with a raised by a cult characteristic. All those combined are going to give you a lot of avenues for magic in the game. Or you could say, well, I want to have a background, I want to have a familiarity with magic, but in the Secret War, what I really am interested in is being a boffin and being kind of like somebody, like a scientist, somebody that could like piece things together and strategize and things like that. So I'm going to take a background that has ties with magic, but my archetype is going to be boffin. Or you could do the inverse, where you're an occultist, and right now in the Secret War you have magical power, but your background is that you were in the Navy. So just being a magic user, just at the base level, there's a lot of variety to what a magic user or someone who has affinity with power can look like, based on how you mix and match the levels of those 3 builds. Alright, should we cover magic real quick before we go on? It's pretty simple. In order to use magic, your character will need to snag the occultist archetype. Now, you can get a bit of magic feel through your background and characteristic options, but if you want to cast spells, you'll need to be an occultist. Once you pick that, you'll need to decide what type of spellcaster you are. There's 3 types to choose from. Traditionalists use insight as an attribute to cast their spells, and are further divided into Norse rune weavers, Celtic druids, and psychics. You must pick one of these 3, and each group has their own spell list. So if you want to be a traditionalist, you've got to pick a type of traditionalist. Next, you could pick to be a dabbler, and dabblers can draw from any spell list. But they start out with flawed versions of the spells, and their magic is a bit more chaotic. Dabblers will use the will attribute for their magic. Finally, researchers use reason as an attribute, and can also choose from any spell, but get fewer spells than at the beginning than the dabblers or the traditionalists, and their magic is less chaotic than the dabblers. To cast the spell, you'll use the attribute tied to your magic type, plus the skill referenced in your chosen spell. That will give you the target number. The difficulty level of this test is also communicated by the spell, though it may be modified at the GM's discretion based on the context of the scene. After you've made your roll, whether you succeed or fail, you'll need to take on the cost. Harnessing magic isn't free, and it can quickly start to wear on your mind. The cost will require you to roll a certain amount of damage dice and apply any damage against your own stress. Spellcasters literally play against their own health while wielding magic. Once you've done those things, and assuming you've succeeded on your skill test, you'll be able to apply the spell's effect. Alright, let's bring it home with combat. Each fight begins the same, with a player of the Game Master's choice taking the first action. In rare cases, the GM could say that a villain starts first and spend 2 points of threat to make it happen, but most of the time the heroes start. Once a character goes, the turn passes to the other side, and one of those characters go, and then it passes back. If one side has more characters than the other, all of their remaining characters go at the end of the round before we start a new one. Players and GMs can also choose to keep the initiative by spending 2 points of momentum or threat, respectively, and then they get to pick one of their other characters to go next. On a character's turn, they get a minor action and a major action. Major actions are things like attacking, casting a spell, readying an action, or making a skill check. A full list can be found on page 29. In addition, there's also a special action called Catch Breath, which allows you to potentially recover lost stress in the middle of a fight. Minor actions are things like aiming, which allows you to roll a single d20 on your attack roll, drawing an item, or moving. Moving isn't gridded or grid-based in Achtung. Rather, the 2d20 system uses the concept of zones. Zones are distinctive one from another. One zone might be the North Corridor, while another is the control room, and the third is the catwalk. Distance is further divided into 5 ranges: reach, close, medium, long, and extreme. Extreme is anything more than 3 zones away, or 3 zones away. Long is 2 zones away, medium is 1 zone, close is within the same zone, and reach is adjacent. Whenever a character moves, they can spend their minor action to move to an adjacent zone or to close to within reach with a character in the same zone. If they move into an adjacent zone, they get to determine if they want to move within reach of any of the characters there or not. So, as an example, Andrew is in the catwalk zone, and he wants to move to the control room zone, which is right next to it. He can use his minor action to move into the control room, climbing down off the catwalk, and then he can say, I want to be outside of reach of the enemy that's there, or I want to be within reach when I move into that zone. The rush major action will potentially allow you to move through multiple zones in a single turn, and once you're in position, you're ready to make your attack. With melee weapons, you'll make an opposed agility plus fighting test against your opponent, with both of you having a standard difficulty of 1. Your successes cancel each other's out, and the winner deals damage. So if you have 2 successes and your opponent only gets 1, his 1 cancels out one of yours, you succeed. And if you succeed or they succeed, you get to decide and deal damage. The target may forego the damage if they want to. If they like, you attack me, but I'm not going to deal damage to you, they can instead choose to move anywhere within the zone for free. So if you close to within reach range of the villain and you attack them and they succeed, they can either deal damage to you or they can say, I'm going to get outside your reach this time. With ranged attacks, you don't roll opposed, but instead you make a coordination plus fighting test with a standard difficulty of 1 as well. Succeed and you deal damage. The Game Master always has the ability to modify the difficulty based on context. Magic works identically to this, but uses different attributes. If you manage to hit, this is where the d6s come into effect. Like I mentioned at the start of the game has funky dice, but assuming you use standard d6s, this is how you'll inflict damage. First, see how many dice your weapon gives you. Next, add any bonus dice for having a 9 or higher in the attribute you're using for damage. If you're using magic, add your base power die. Roll all the dice together and ignore all rolled 3s and 4s. 1s are going to deal 1 point of stress damage, 2s deal 2 points, and 5s and 6s both deal a point each, plus an effect. Each weapon has an effect it can produce, and rolling a 5 or 6 potentially triggers them. Effects usually do stuff like bypass armor or add additional damage. Add up everything, and the total goes against the target. But before it's applied to stress, it'll have to get past a couple of things. Physical damage will have to get past armor. Your armor score is initially calculated based on your brawn, with a 9 or higher giving you some points in armor. Actual physical armor can be also purchased and goes towards this total as well. Any physical attacks are reduced by the total value of your armor before being applied to your stress meter. Mental damage has to get past courage. So if somebody gives you a psychic attack, your courage score is initially calculated based on your will, with a 9 or higher giving you some amount of courage. Any mental attacks are reduced by the total value of your courage before being applied to stress. Both physical damage that gets past armor and mental damage that gets through courage reduce the same pool of stress. Once you're out of stress, you'll start taking injuries. Now, you have 3 slots for injuries, and the first time you take damage that exceeds your remaining stress, you'll take your first injury, regardless of whether it's mental or physical damage. By the way, you also take an injury if you suffer stress of 5 or more in a single hit, even if you have stress to spare. If both of these happen, you take 5 or more stress, and you burn through all your stress, you take 2 injuries at once. Whenever you take an injury, it counts as a new truth, and the GM will tell you what to put in your box. For a physical wound, it might be a gunshot wound, or a burn, or a broken bone. But for a mental attack, it might be panic, or dread, or something similar. Each time you take an injury, your complication range also expands by 1. So having 1 injury means that even on a difficulty level 1 challenge, you're going to have a complication manifest on a 19 or a 20. Once you've suffered 3 injuries, you're defeated, which means you fall prone and you can't take any actions. And if you have more physical wounds than mental ones, you're also dying. When you start your next turn, dying, roll a d6, and on a 5 or a 6, you die. Next turn, do the same thing over and over and over again until you roll that 5 or 6 and die, or somebody heals you. You recover all lost stress at the start of a new scene, but your injuries usually last longer or until they're treated, and even then they could become nasty scars that add new, often detrimental truths to your character. You can read more about healing and stress and injuries in general on page 28. All in all, fights in Achtung Cthulhu should be fast and dynamic with a lot of room for imaginative solutions and brilliant strategy. You're going to have an absolute blast with it. That's it, folks. That's the video. I'm having a lot of fun running this system, and if you're looking for a new approach to Cthulhu, I would highly recommend giving it a shot. This year, we'll be running a whole bunch of games in this system at various conventions across the country as part of our partnership with Modiphius. We'd love to have you sign up to come sit at one of these tables. In addition, throughout the months of May and June here in 2023, we're going to be running our own little live stream of a few sessions of this game here on the Twitch channel and on YouTube. We think that's going to be a lot of fun, and we'd love for you to check those out as well. If you like this video, consider subscribing to our channel. We have a lot of great content and a lot of different playlists, all centered around getting you into more RPGs and making those games better. We also have a podcast. It's called Geekscant, and it features myself and a couple of my Yahoo Game Master friends chatting about topics that come up at our gaming tables. We talk about Kickstarters, RPG news, and interview creators by the dozens. Go give us a listen if podcasts are your thing. It's also recorded live on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook each and every week. You can expect a video like this about a different system every few weeks, and until then, we'll see you next time.